Humanity can also be partially lost through disappointment.
Leadership must be humane. Yes, leaders must be empathetic.
If you are always strict, yes, then the strictness will eventually not be noticed anymore. If you are always kind, then it won't be noticed anymore either.
Maybe it was a gradual process. I don't know, but suddenly we miss this humanity in customer and partner relationships.
Humanity will disappear even more and more in total, but I believe that will happen. Welcome to a new episode of Digital.Decoded, your podcast about leadership, digitalization, transformation, and sales. I am Mario Pufahl, and with me is André Kiehne.
Hello, Mario. It's wonderful to record a new episode with you again. Exciting topic this time, right?
Yes, absolutely. Today we have the topic, where does humanity actually remain in business? I think it's a great topic, and I'm looking forward to discussing it with you. So, back to where does humanity remain in business, dear André? I don't know. Let me take a look. Maybe it's under the table. I don't know. But joking aside, Mario, I believe humanity in business, for me, it has various dimensions.
And let's see if it has similar dimensions for you. One dimension is externally directed, towards customers, towards partners. Perhaps there's also a very important dimension directed internally towards employees, towards leaders, and among each other. Yes. Can you think of anything else? Did I forget something?
No, I think the dimensions are correct, but generally, at the end of the day, also customers to suppliers. Yes, I always find this word supplier so terrible. Yes, we always tell our customers we are medium-sized businesses. We foster partnerships. Yes, and from my point of view, that's a very, very important point because a supplier is simply someone you try to push down in price, yes, who is interchangeable and who ultimately only creates limited value. And that's something I, for example, don't want to be, yes. Or I have a really great story, Mario, that fits perfectly here.
That was a very, very long time ago. I worked for a company and we were invited to a negotiation round at a large German car manufacturer. And it was the final negotiation. And we entered this meeting room. No windows. No coffee, no water, and we had to wait an hour before the meeting started. And I asked myself the question, I am a supplier, that was relatively clear to me. And the question I asked myself was, where is the humanity now?
Yeah, when you don't get any water, right? But I also have a nice story for you, dear André. I felt a lot of humanity. I once did business in Russia, and there I went. It was my first business in Russia, my first major contract signing. It was a long time ago, 15 years, 20 years. And it was like this on the first day, you were treated like royalty. And really, all the cliches were fulfilled. Going to the sauna with them, you drank vodka. And from glasses like these, yes. And so there was a lot of humanity. However, the humanity ended the next morning because I thought the same people who drank with me in the evening would also negotiate with me in the morning. No, they were different. And they were tough, yes. That was the end of the humanity. And they conducted the negotiation with me nicely. You can imagine I had such a headache, yes. So I will never forget that, and I learned a lot from it, yes.
I can well imagine that, That's a great story. But it also shows the different dimensions. So showing humanity outwardly, yes, whether it's partners/suppliers, yes, or whether it's customer relationships. So I think that's really important. And we've already talked about the topic of sales in an episode, about the use of social selling, where you also put people at the center, which I consider important. But I also find that important, and I don't know how you feel about it, Mario. I observe in many companies that only KPIs, meaning key performance indicators, leading indicators, OKRs, and dashboards matter. And people are actually completely uninteresting.
I think that's sometimes said about us too, right? So I think no company can really deny that, at least if you take a look at Kununu, I think you always have only those who leave and are totally frustrated, yes? So they write in there. But those who are there and satisfied, they just don't write in there, right? Yes, that's how it is in life. But a good point, because it has indeed become tougher from my perspective. Yes. And the question is always, is a certain toughness necessary? Do you also have to apply certain control instruments and KPIs more strongly nowadays? I personally believe that there has been a significant business disruption due to the Corona period. Yes. I mean, for us, it was like this. All employees were always somewhere with the customer. But now, during the Corona period, you couldn't get hold of the people at all. That means you have to manage it through KPIs and through teams, and you have to somehow steer your company. We are nearly 1,000 employees. Yes. And, does humanity sometimes fall by the wayside? Yes, certainly yes. I always try to personally bring it in. But of course, one must also say it's not a one-way street. Both sides have to be humane.
And yes,
I have at least experienced that aspect as well. There are really people who lie to your face without hesitation. And I also ask myself, is that humane?
Definitely not, Mario. But I have another perspective on that. I talk to many CEOs and board members, and they actually report the exact opposite to me, that the COVID-19 pandemic and hybrid working from home have led to a sense of entitlement among employees. Like, I only want to work from home, work only 4 days a week, and so on. How do you see that? Do you have similar experiences?
Yes, yes, and no. So you often have the discussion, our children are already grown up, and you hear so much about what the youth can't do and how bad they are and so on. I think one thing that is always done nowadays, which is also human, is generalization. In my view, no one can really free themselves from that. But this whole generalization that everything is bad or no longer human or just business or just KPIs, that is, of course, driven by the media, but it's complete nonsense. And from my perspective, to come back to your question, yes, Corona has changed people. That's true. Has the sense of entitlement increased? I think yes, but I also don't believe it's solely because of Corona. Rather, it's a mix of various things. I believe Corona has shown people that it's important to also look after themselves because life can end quickly. We haven't felt such a sense of finiteness and restriction for a long time as we did with Corona. And the second thing is, of course, at the end of the day, it's also about having a win-win-win situation, as we discussed in an episode. And sometimes you don't achieve a win-win when you're in such a large or larger organization, and you have to stand up for yourself, because at the end of the day, those who don't stand up for themselves get run over.
Yes, and that's you just said, yes, Corona contributed to it, Mario, and I quite agree with that. But I also believe, and I'm absolutely with you on this, it wasn't just Corona and the partly terrible experiences we all had there and the fates that arose, but it also has something to do, in my view, with technology. Technology makes us, on the one hand, totally efficient and transparent, but on the other hand, it also somewhat increases the pace, the frequency, which, in my view, can then be interpreted as a lack of humanity, right?
Yes, definitely. But I would also say in our generation, I would claim we were also partly crazy, to put it in German. I come from the Ruhr area, as you know. I have always been a man of frank words. I used to work 100 hours a week during peak times, always on Saturdays, sometimes on Sundays too. And now we criticize the younger people for not wanting to do that anymore. But at the end of the day, if we take a look in the mirror, we were crazy too. And of course, it brought us a lot of prosperity. But do we want, you have children too, André. Do we want our children to live the way we did back then? No.
No, I wouldn't do it. I totally agree with you because, of course, it has. How should I put it? Enabled us a lot, provided many advantages, and I would probably do it the same way again if I could turn back time. But it's a different attitude and that I have towards it now. And if I were asked to work as much and as intensively as I did back then, I wouldn't want to anymore and probably couldn't either. We've also gotten older, Mario. But that's a very, very important question. And where does this humanity begin? So is it humane to say you have to because I did it back then too and everyone has to go through it? Or is it humane to say, listen, how do we reconcile the different positions, the different objectives? I think it's more the latter, isn't it?
Yes and no. For me, without directly opposing, You don't always have to reconcile everything. I mean, I don't really like this consensus soup, as I always call it. So really, everyone just holding hands all the time. Sometimes you think you're in therapy sessions in companies and that just doesn't work anymore. And nowadays, you really have to be able to say or criticize something as a boss. It really has to be on a reasonable level, but you're sometimes not allowed to do it anymore for various reasons. You hurt someone in quotes because they belong to a minority group, or you're too direct, or there are so many examples of this. I think everyone knows them, but is that human nowadays? Everyone always talks about humanity towards employees, but am I treated humanely as a boss? It's also human for me to make a mistake or maybe lose my temper, even if I'm not allowed to do that anymore today, but it can happen. I don't want to harm anyone with that, but is it humane if I'm not forgiven for it? Not humane either.
Well, I don't know. So if leadership means being tough, Mario, and leadership means sometimes banging on the table and losing your temper, then that's not humane to me.
Yes, I think it's not something I do intentionally sometimes, but it can just happen. I'm a type, you know this color theory, Andre, and I'm totally blue, up to a point where I suddenly turn bright red. And that happens maybe once in 7 years, but when it does, it's bad for everyone involved. Do I want that? No, I definitely don't want that, but it can just happen. And then I come back to the topic of humanity.
Now, I'm getting an impression of it, and now I'm with you again, Mario. Namely, we talked about authenticity. And if you say something stupid, do something stupid, and maybe lose your temper, and it doesn't happen every week. But if you have, excuse me, a crappy day or whatever, then I believe it's human if you have the ability to admit it.
Exactly.
And I don't observe this often, thank God, but I have occasionally noticed that there are some people who can't admit it, or they do it constantly and believe that it's normal. And I don't find that human.
Yes, we totally agree on that. No question about it. But on the other hand, Wolfgang always being on a cozy course, that doesn't work either. And we also need to give directives. And more, I also believe, as we discussed in the other episode about organizations and people, I think many want to have a clear course. And accordingly, you can see that in politics currently, there's simply a lack of leadership. And that brings me to a point. People often talk about leadership discipline. I find that a really terrible word. So leadership is one thing, and leadership. By the way, I like the term thought leader, so that you really set thoughts and are perceived accordingly. But demanding leadership discipline and discipline all the time, it becomes difficult, especially with people who might be more creative and not so disciplined. That can also be the case.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, that's the question, Mario. What is discipline? So discipline can mean totally different things. I recently wrote an article on LinkedIn about the topic of empathy, because when we talk about leadership, especially with the idea that leadership must be humane, leaders must be empathetic, which I fundamentally agree with. But if empathy is confused, as you already mentioned, with being overly soft and everything always having to be smooth and in flow, and we must not openly criticize, then empathy is fundamentally harmful in my view. And this clarity in terms of leadership discipline, because leadership discipline has also changed, Mario. In the past, leadership discipline was something different than what it is today. Today, much more emphasis is placed on empathy, which is correct, but it can also be negative, as I have just illustrated. But I believe the topic of leadership discipline, or let's use another term, leadership principles, is not present at all in many companies.
Yes, and there is also another point in addition to that, Andre. At the end of the day, if you are always the same, I am an advocate of the idea that you also have to lead situationally. If you are always the same, if you are always strict, then the strictness will eventually not be noticed anymore. If you are always kind, then that will also not be noticed anymore. If you are mostly nice and empathetic, but occasionally also strict, then that naturally has a completely different effect. And I think that is also very, very important and also human to return to our topic.
True, and also human. And I think that in society, and we briefly touched on this earlier, we have already discussed this in another episode. Nowadays, it's difficult, or let's say sometimes even very, very uncomfortable to hold certain positions because you feel like you might step on someone's toes or offend something. And I believe that the ability to consciously engage in discourse within companies, society, and politics, or without immediately being labeled, Mario, he's a hothead, which you are not, by the way, Mario, but, getting that label, I consider fundamentally wrong. And this ability to engage in discourse and debate is something we are partly lacking, and leadership is part of that.
But let's return to our main topic. We've talked a lot about humanity now. We also discussed humanity in business as a topic. We focused a lot on companies, Johan, but we also briefly touched on the point of humanity between customer and supplier, or customer and partner. I want to tell you a story. We have a major client whom we've had for 5 or 6 years and still have. I won't mention the name, that's obvious. But one thing really disappointed me. So I want to deliberately choose this term. The client had something that we did for them. We did it for 4 years, put it out to tender for the client. And then practically not only did they not choose us anymore. That's one thing. Everyone has the freedom to choose their partner. That's clear. But the way it was done, after 4 years, you have to imagine, we just received an email from the purchasing department. We didn't even have the opportunity. We found out afterward it was such a small difference in the price. We would certainly have gone along with it, but we weren't even asked. And that was also a point. I once wrote a report or a LinkedIn article on the topic, where is the humanity in business before Christmas? That's a Christmas topic. But it really occupied me because I was personally offended and then also disappointed, because I really thought such a pitch involves a lot of work. I really urged my employees to do their best, even though it was an existing customer. I said, you have to treat this as if it were a new customer. And we really put in a lot of effort, worked night shifts, and then you just get such a casual email. And I was really, I would say, pissed off.
Yes, I understand that well. I mean, at the same time, the customer obviously has the freedom of choice, but it's clear. It's about the manner, if I understand correctly. Exactly. And I can totally relate on both. I've had such experiences too. That sometimes the manner, even in business dealings between customer and partner, is sometimes very questionable. What is the reason for that, Mario? What has led to us suddenly, or maybe it's been a gradual process, I don't know, but that we suddenly miss this humanity in customer and partner relationships?
Yes. So I'll pick up on this example again. What was the reason there? We've known the customer for a long time, and it was simply due to the separation of powers. The specialist department worked with us. They were great and are still very satisfied. But the purchasing department had different KPIs, and for them, it was simply important to choose the cheapest option. At the end of the day, if you were to do a full cost accounting, it probably was never the cheapest because the new service provider also has to be onboarded and so on. I think the price difference was marginal at the end of the day. So for the company, I believe it was even more expensive. I find that keyword also humanity in business. Business is, of course, always business. That's quite clear. Certain rules also apply there. But in the past, and I think it's worth reminding ourselves of this, I always found it great. There used to be a handshake. So I remember I once did a project, dear André, 20 years ago. I did the acceptance. Today you do acceptance protocols for IT systems. I did it in the hallway with the project manager with a handshake, and then the matter was settled.
Unthinkable today.
Unthinkable. In the past, people also smoked on airplanes. Today, that's also unthinkable. Things were different back then. Yes. But then, and that I believe is the matter of trust to some extent. We already discussed this topic, and humanity, they go hand in hand. This trust, I believe, is partly no longer present in business, and is, of course, also learned knowledge, because, I mean, how often have customers, as I am a consultant or IT service provider, been disappointed? So I think humanity is also partly lost through disappointment.
Yes, but another topic just came to my mind. That's the question I'm asking myself. We already talked about KPIs, targets, and so on at the beginning. And in your example, the purchasing department obviously had a different target. That means it was measured strictly according to the target, and decisions were made accordingly. Now let's think, our podcast is called Digital.Decoded. Let's think about the increasing digitalization of all our processes, and on top of that, and it shows the topic of artificial intelligence. Then one could provocatively claim that, I could, in this case, there wouldn't have been a need for a purchasing department or a specialized department. They would just have needed to load the values into a own system, and then a decision would have been made. The system would probably have done it faster, or a provocative thesis, and better than the different people did. The question I'm asking myself right now, if we allow decisions to be made solely based on hard facts and specific criteria, forgetting humanity in the process, do we still have a societal AA togetherness that is designed to truly create added value collectively? Because I would say even a customer partner relationship is not just there for one of them to make money, but value must be created collectively. Something must be created for the customer that makes them better, more cost efficient, generates more business, whatever it may be.
That depends on the economic situation. Currently, it is indeed the case that many service providers are suffering greatly and are, of course, dependent on their customers. That's just how it is. But let's also remember 5 or 6 years ago, during the digitalization hype, companies were extremely dependent on service providers. I believe these are always cycles, dear André. That brings me back to my thesis about disappointment. I believe that, in part, we as IT service providers are now receiving the consequences for how we, or some of us, of course not me, that's clear, behaved a few years ago. We shouldn't complain about it now. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth is also human.
It is also human, but I believe, Mario, that what we can conclude, at least from my perspective, is that the topic of humanity in business life will continue to be a very important factor, / must be from my point of view.
It must, but I believe it won't be like that. Why?
You believe it won't be like that? Okay.
No, honestly, I would like to agree with you, dear André, but I believe it will simply become even tougher. It will become even more transparent. AI is sifting through us. We will all be even more geared towards efficiency. We all have to gear ourselves even more towards efficiency. And I believe I'm now putting forward this thesis. Humanity will disappear even more overall, which I personally find very terrible, but I believe that will happen.
I am putting forward a different thesis, Mario. I believe that the companies that will be successful in the medium and long term are those that place humanity at the core of their actions and keep it there, and not just focus on KPIs, leading indicators, dashboards, and so on. I believe, and perhaps it is also tied to a hope, but I believe that these companies will be more successful in the medium and long term.
What we all want to wish for, dear André. Personally, I believe for some companies that's the case. But on the other hand, if you take a look, I think it also depends a bit on the company, both the industry it's in, and how significant the human factor is. I believe in the service sector, this is certainly the case in many areas, but where you have strong production, where robots play an increasingly larger role, I could imagine that this will continue to increase. And let's also consider machine-to-machine learning. You're well versed in that too. I believe all these things will get a turbo boost from AI, and I think some people will definitely be left behind.
I believe that too. However, I always think that whenever people interact with each other, and that's the case in customer partner relationships or in employee leadership relationships, if we forget or deprioritize the human factor there, then we are not doing justice to our own nature. After all, we are humans, and humans need community. People need, as we discussed in an episode, They need status, they need relationships, they need this security, they need fairness, and so on. And if we don't focus on that, then in my view, organizations, which are also systems of people, can no longer function. And I see it the same way in the customer-partner relationship.
Yes, but I believe that this is exactly where you need to make that distinction. You are the AISH leadership expert, but from my experience, I believe you have two things. You have the organization itself, which will be even more geared towards efficiency. It will become even more inhumane, in my view. And then you have the people themselves. And it really depends on whether you let yourself get pulled into this, I'll call it the efficiency, momentum or not, into the tornado, to put it bluntly. Or do you maintain your humanity and not let yourself be driven and sometimes break the rules? That's also one of my favorite sayings. Don't ask for permission. Please ask for forgiveness. And that's the point. We too often forget to just do things, to maybe even cross a line because it's right, because we are convinced of it. And then you can always apologize later. And that is something that sometimes scratches at humanity, because those who are not so rule compliant are, of course, also viewed critically.
They are also viewed critically. But I think, Mario, we won't answer the question today of which path or which way is the right one. I believe we have a correct tendency or a shared opinion that hopefully it remains humane. But how the future develops, we will observe that. But I believe what we can conclude is, everywhere business is conducted between people, it must remain humane. Everywhere leadership is involved, where employees are managed, it should remain humane. We talked about empathy, which is important, but should not be overestimated. And I believe for me, Mario, humanity is such a soft skill that, from my perspective, will become increasingly important in the business world of tomorrow.
Yes, especially in a digital world, because that can absolutely make the difference. People always differentiate between hard and soft skills, but I would rather label it as a core skill, because if you want to be a good leader, you also have to be humane.
That's a perfect closing remark, in my opinion, Mario. And I just looked at the clock. We are almost at 30 minutes, and that was an incredibly exciting discussion about humanity in business. Dear listeners, dear viewers, as always, feel free to leave. Let's ask questions, reach out to us. We want to encourage discourse. We want to talk with you. We want to know what moves you. If you have ideas for further topics, we'd love to hear them. And Mario, I think we are both incredibly excited, not only for the feedback, but also for the upcoming episodes. Absolutely. And all that's left for me to say is, take care and stay human.
Exactly, stay human.